Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets drop a critical game on the road against Orlando, but in the process, provide another alarming sample size for Mikal Bridges. What is going on with the player that was supposed to lead this team? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And Doug, while we could talk about a 114-106 loss and how Orlando gave the Nets every opportunity to fight back and actually steal this win, we'll get to that after we talk about an absolute disastrous start for Mikal Bridges in this game, which has been an alarming trend for him.
Yeah, we're kind of running out of ways to be worried about this, I think, or new ways to sort of sum it up or try to explain it. It's just been a disastrous stretch for him over the last, not a small sample size at this point. He's top 20 points just 3 times in his last 13 games. Barely he had gone 15 or under in 9 of those, and was headed for that too in this game, except kind of got some garbage time-ish points to carry him up to 17 points in 30 minutes. Was effectively benched to close out the end of the first half. He had played 12 minutes at halftime, and that wasn't because of foul trouble or anything else. Ends up with 30 minutes all said and done. And I don't know how you aren't anything but just very, very alarmed at how he's played over, kind of the whole season, but specifically since the All-Star break, we'll say, right? Like where the efficiency's dropped precipitously. He basically has 2 good scoring games in this stretch, one versus Atlanta at 38 points, and then a decent game against Cleveland with 25. Everything else has just been bad. Bad relative to expectations.
Yeah.
And really anything else. And it's an alarming trend. It's kind of without explanation, except to say maybe the expectations were still too high. But even if the expectations were too high, this is still so far below his career efficiency and stuff. And so I don't know, if he's tired, if it's just been too long with too many minutes for him, if the weight of the, having to take a lot on for this team is just catching up with him, if defenses have just figured him out, which they clearly have, if you even looked at this game. Long story long, this has just been, it's a really, really troubling sort of turn of events for him over the course of the second half of the season.
30 minutes tonight, 5 of 13 from the field, gets to the line 7 times. You mentioned a lot of this comes kind of in the latter stages of this game. 17 points, by the way. He was the second highest point scorer, which is reflective of this game overall.
But to clarify that, he had 9 points with like 7 minutes left to go in the third. Yeah. He had a couple, he had a sort of a putback bucket that probably should have been a Thomas and one, or like Thomas going to the line. And I would call 7 of these points sort of garbage time points. Like the game was pretty much over. You know what I mean? So I started
to triple down 14 or whatever and made an 11-point game. Like it didn't matter.
Exactly. And I usually don't like to call stuff like this out, but context, I do think for this matters, because this was something I was really paying attention to, because this is where I went back and started looking just sort of at some of the game stuff. And that's when he had 9 points, and it seemed like inconceivable that he was going to top 20. This is how it was like kind of clear for me when it happened. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, but it is the trend with him, obviously, where these points are coming. No, I mentioned there about second highest point scorer, right? So it just tells you a little bit about this game and where it went.
Yeah, of course.
And by the way, as a little bit of a contrast here, because we're going to talk probably as we were debating this coming into the episode, usually we compartmentalize the post games and then talk a little bit bigger picture. But unfortunately, the bigger picture is going to fall right into this. But you did also get kind of the contrast here between Mikal Bridges and between Cam Thomas. Like, to go look at this game, everyone's going to have kind of up and down performances. But when you get 9 and 19 out of Cam and he plays 39 minutes, gives you 21 points, it's not a perfect game by him either. 8 rebounds, 4 assists. The stat line kind of doesn't matter here. But it's more about that at no point did it feel like Cam Thomas wasn't on a possession-to-possession basis engaged in doing what Cam Thomas does. It's really hard for me to go 24 minutes of game action to get to halftime and talk about Mikal Bridges. He had a 0-1-1 line at the halftime of this game. One rebound, one assist. So there are even versions of this where Mikal Bridges, he finishes the night with 15 points. Okay, but he had 7 assists or he had 8 rebounds, right? Or through the first half of the game, no scoring, but because of the way the defenses were playing, you're getting guys in other really good spots and they're knocking down looks. Listen, the team overall struggled here, but he may as well not have played in the first half of this game. And that is, you cannot be one of the 2 best players on a roster night over night. And we're talking about this being a bad game for him, but it's an extended time period that we've looked at really here with these samples. You cannot be a player like this that effectively goes away. He goes away and in ways that are alarming on both ends of the floor, really, because not even like we're saying, oh, but high leverage defensively, he really makes an impact there. We've seen it. He's too undersized. He can't play physical against spots, right? All these switches, everything is going against him here. And I know we want to get even more into maybe the psychological side of this when it comes to where this season has gone. But just on a high level, man, I'm surprised that I would say Mikal Bridges at times looks less than engaged with what the Brooklyn Nets are about down the stretch of this season.
Yeah, like he was getting kind of cooked on defense at times, just sort of overpowered by the bigger wings, right? These guys are particular problems, though he's supposed to be a 3, came in here with a defensive, just sort of, resume that had him taking a lot of these assignments, these bigger wings from other teams, but that feels completely gone. We've really actually not talked too much about his defense this year, mostly because when you take on a bigger offensive load, it's sort of understood that you will be okay, like sort of like taking slightly lesser defensive role, because I think that's just often what happens, right? That's just kind of like the ebb and flow of the NBA. But when you're kind of getting not much on either end, that's the problem, right? Because the understanding there is if there's going to be less of a defensive sort of stance here, then that's going to be because the offense is like really taking a tick up, but that's gone the other direction also. So you're kind of getting worst of both worlds in terms of what he's bringing on a nightly basis. Again, there are times where it's crept up over. There's some examples where it's been okay, but by and large, if you look in the aggregate since the All-Star break, I'm hesitant. You said lack of engagement. I'm really always hesitant to go there because I know you're really not, but I think we're basically trying to explain it, right? Like this is the problem is there's how else to explain it. Like, is it fatigue? Is it being just badly matched up right here? Because like when he gets against bigger size wings, he has a hard time. Like this has been a problem for him before. Is it like, what is it? It's just too hard to explain. And so I think that's where we end up grasping at just different ideas, because I mean, what is there do? It's just so troubling how this has gone over the last few weeks, months, and kind of the whole season.
Coming up here in a second, I'll explain why if Mikal Bridges was disengaged, it's totally justified. This is not the team that he signed up for when he came over in the trade from Phoenix. We'll dive into all those reasons and what else went wrong against Orlando coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. Demon time on PrizePicks, baby. You can win up to 100 times your money with as few as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 on PrizePicks into 1,000. Demons and Goblins over on PrizePicks. That's really a new and exciting way to play. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins are going to give you different payouts depending on how hard or easy it is to go more or less on these different projections. Maybe you went in there on PrizePicks tonight and you went less on whatever on the 21 points there for Mikal Bridges. Didn't feel too worried about that one if that was the direction you wanted to go on PrizePicks, because all you're doing on PrizePicks is you're going against their player projections, more or less points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. For NBA, you're going home runs, hits, stolen bases with MLB right around the corner. You can combine different picks, different sports, different players all together on PrizePicks. And like I said, you can turn $10 into 1,000. It's the easiest way to play daily fantasy. You go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. You're going to get a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. First deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we continue the post-game episode following the Brooklyn Nets loss on the road here, 114-106 at the hands of the Orlando Magic. We told you a few games ago here, effectively prior to the weekend, that the play-in discussion should be officially killed for the Brooklyn Nets. You don't deserve it when you lose games to Memphis, when you lose games to Detroit. You also have Atlanta taking on, at the time during this recording, Portland, so we can even get a little bit further away from those dreams being dashed as well. Very, very high level here. Before we talk about why maybe Mikal Bridges would be disengaged, and if you want to talk more about this game, feel free to jump in with it. But I now do think back to, well, you trade all the picks, you get all these picks from Phoenix, and we want Mikal Bridges, and we want Cam Johnson and Sean Marks. I drive a hard bargain, maybe the hardest bargain you ever seen in your life. Cut two. We're coming up on now a full season worth of games with the 27 from a year ago. Okay, listen, the picks are still the picks, and you take that value of it. But we specifically looked at those two players, and Mikal Bridges obviously to a higher level even than Cam Johnson, as being critical to get back in that trade. Doesn't look like that was so difficult to let go of if you're Phoenix now. Now, those are great supporting players, and it looks different when you have superstars and all that stuff. But those two assets specifically are greatly diminished, at least from a value to the Brooklyn Nets in this season and going to the offseason as well.
Yeah, okay. So I think league-wide that Mikal probably still is basically the same value he was at the trade deadline. That's my guess, is that like NBA front offices are not going to react like fans to a 10, 15 game, maybe even a season sample size if you think the guy's been miscast, which we have agreed many times over the course of this year that he's just miscast in this role, right? He's better served as a 2 or a 3 on a really good team, and it's going to be hard. The Nets have for sure some organizational build issues here that are hurting everybody. They hurt Cam Thomas, they hurt Mikal Bridges, right? They don't have great point guard play. It's unclear if they run like really great systems for these guys. They probably could all use one high level wing above everybody else to sort of take some of the pressure off and really let all these guys do the things they do best. So I think from like an overall value standpoint, my guess is that value with the contract and everything has not dropped tons here.
Sure.
But it certainly hasn't gone up. I think that's a problem as they head into the offseason too, is like, look in the mirror time about what you really have. I think that might be the bigger problem, because it's hard to imagine a ceiling now. Because I think we're seeing more and more what the floor looks like.
Yeah, and to your point, I think Mikal still does have that value. Another team's going to look at him and say, oh, we see exactly how he fits in behind our other two better players, right? Maybe a superstar and then another elite talent on the roster. That's fine. This either comes back to one of two things. Sean Marks, Jose, organizationally, hey, listen, we're going to sell you guys a bill of goods. You're going to lap it up. You're going to love it. And it'll take you about 3/4 of the season to realize that that's not going to be a foundation that we can really build around and be successful with. Or they over-evaluated what Mikal Bridges is as an individual talent, what Cam Johnson is going to be, and what that was going to look like. If they wanted to, like, injuries play a factor over the course of this season. We obviously acknowledge that. There's some high-level ones that really impact what they're able to do this year. But this isn't a great team. I mean, it's not a good team. It's a bad team, right? They're 8th right now in the lottery as it currently stands. The Houston Rockets are in that 8th spot. And you cannot be sitting there if you're Sean Marks in the Nets, unless you were, again, trying to do the PR game and really think that this roster was going to get you where you want it to be, which was back to the playoffs. That was their stance. And we saw very quickly, following some of these decisions, following the trade deadline, Sean Marks come out and say, well, we still think we're an attractive destination, this offseason, stars, all that stuff. But they started moving past the idea of going and making the playoffs right now, wanting to be competitive right now. It seems like they slowly, moved the goalpost a little bit on what the agenda was and what the timeline was. And I think that does relate back to the evaluation on Mikal Bridges and where he truly is in an NBA pecking order.
Well, how could you not? I mean, like, they've gone through a long sample size now, and they've seen that like this just isn't good enough, right? Yeah. And I know that they've had injury problems, but I wouldn't say they've had so many more injury problems than any other team. There's been some teams that have really been pillars of health for sure, right? Like, so it's, and that's going to happen every NBA season. Like, OKC's had great health this year, right? Mm-hmm. Denver has been really healthy again and really good. So like there are teams that Boston has been pretty much healthy except for when they want to rest guys. And then there's teams that have been totally like way unhealthier than the Nets that have fought really hard. Like the Knicks have had tons of injuries. The Cavs have had tons of injuries. Obviously, Philly was up with that Embiid. Like, so I don't know if the Nets can really look and say, oh, it's all injuries here. Yeah, the Simmons things hurts, but that was kind of predictable, right? And then a lot of the other guys, like Mikal's played every game. So it's no injury for him. Like he's played literally every single game.
And that's the difference too, because to contrast, like we'll say a player like Cam Thomas, who he's up and down. We know he's still developing into what he's going to be ultimately. But if you gave me 82 games with injuries in and around the lineup and everything else, and Cam Thomas played 82 games, well, I'd be pretty bullish on predicting where his numbers would land by the end of the year. Mikal Bridges with guys in and out of the lineup, injuries around him, and he plays 82 games. Well, we're learning that actually really does impact how productive he can be, how consistent he can be with the ball in his hands. We saw it, to relate back to this game tonight. We've seen this dozens of times over the course of this year. When he has that ball in his hands and he's going down on the offensive end and wants to go towards the basket, it's a bigger defender between him and the cup. It almost guaranteed he's not going to get there. Like,
forget it. It's over.
It's not there. The moves are not there. And you're just waiting for how bad do we think this is going to look when he gets rejected at the rim? And it happened a handful of times tonight again.
Rejected at the rim, rejected in the, or just turned around in the lane, just turned around and stopped in the lane and either settling for sort of a pull up or just turning back around and having to kick it back out because he kind of just got nowhere. We've seen it so many times this year where it's just, and again, this is a tough matchup. These guys they have big wings here. They can kind of track with him. He has trouble beating guys off the dribble. Like he has trouble beating like sort of like average defenders off the dribble. And these guys are definitely higher than average defenders, like in Suggs and Paolo, and even guys like Franz. And then if you get Isaac in there, like kind of forget about it. And so, and then if he does somehow turn the corner and get to the lane, he's had a lot of trouble finishing at the rim. He doesn't really get fouled very often. And the rim finishing just hasn't been there either. Yeah. It's just problematic all the way around. And I in some ways I hate going game by game with him because we come off last game with 25 points against Cleveland. So I just want to say as a reminder, this is not just born out of this game. We would not talk about like one bad Mikal Bridges game.
Yeah.
It's when we have just this long running, lot of minutes, not tons of shots because he can't get them off, not many points because he can't really score against unless like the conditions are sort of optimal. And it's just, it does have you having to take like a long look around, what ultimately is the plan, because how many ways is this team going to get better in the offseason?
Yeah.
There aren't many ways. And if we're just looking at the timeline all the way to 2025 now, are we signed up for another season of this? There's some version where they are signed up for another season that kind of looks like this one. And if you want to talk about like leveling up the chances of burnout, I mean, this is exactly how you do it. Right. Like go through another season of this. At what point does he just ask for a trade? And it's I can't, I don't know. Like that's got to be in that range of outcomes too.
And that's why. So coming up here in a second, I want to highlight some stats from Mikal Bridges' career that I think are almost comical to contrast with what's happening this season. But then, as Doug mentioned right there, this isn't a Mikal Bridges problem. This is a byproduct of what this organization is doing. And there's a world where even a second or third tier player is now going to get to a place where he feels like, gosh, I'd rather do this anywhere else but here. We'll get into that aspect of things coming up here in just 1 second.
All right. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claims as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year. From the date of the first 3% match, must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Locked On Nets post-game episode, just in case you were wondering, we glossed over the fact that the Nets lost again. And they lost again, just in case you're wondering, 114,
Spoiler alert.
106. Which,
Yeah.
spoiler alert, the team is bad and they're losing a lot of basketball games. And I had done the math on this too. Like, I remember, I'll try to do it again here in a second. We talk about where they're going to end up landing here, falling probably further back, assuming that Atlanta grabs a win here over Portland tonight, as that's getting underway while we're actively putting a little cap on this episode. I went back and looked, Doug. There's a journey back in 2021-22 when a young 25-year-old Mikal Bridges was playing 82 games for the Phoenix Suns. It is shocking that from the field, he was shooting 63%, effective field goal percentage over 60. He was knocking down 83% at the line. He was giving you 3-pointers, 37% from deep. He was an all defensive team. He was defensive player of the year runner up in that season. Like, there are so many things so recently that you look at, but I think the stark thing there for me is the shooting percentage, because then you followed up the next year as he comes over into Brooklyn and everything does come back down to earth. Basically, he starts shooting in the 50s, right? The 3-point shooting stays right where it's at effectively for his entire career. It has come down actually a little bit even more this season. He's shooting just over 36%. The free throw shooting, and this is a part of it, this is not an indictment on Mikal Bridges from the standpoint of he should not be one of your 2 best players. He should be your 3rd best player, maybe even less if you want to really get the max value. That free throw shooting percentage is directly related to crunch moments, big time spots, need to knock down shots. I don't necessarily think that he's that guy. Now, maybe he grows into that because he's never had to be that player. But we saw 27 games into last year, which was kind of pressure free for him. This year, there was a pressure, and there still technically remains a pressure, and it just doesn't seem like he's built for that. And this isn't an indictment on him. It's just skill set, role, where you should be playing. The Brooklyn Nets getting him in that Kevin Durant trade has arguably just put him in one of the worst possible positions for him to be successful as he's peaking into his prime years.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at the 81% of free throw shooting, I do wonder, I mean, if we're talking about like fatigue or just like other issues, like that would be mental, like some mental stuff's getting to him. I'm not saying like mentally he's checked out or anything, but like the weight of the franchise has been
all of it
has put on his shoulders. Like they've been so clear about this. He's the star. He's the guy they market. He's the one they do everything about. He's the guy. He's the one that's going to bring in free agents. Everyone loves him. I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. Like this is like basically what's come out of the organization. Like he's friends with everyone. He'll be the one that helps recruit players. Mm-hmm. Like he's the face. There's a lot of pressure that goes with that. And sometimes when you're standing by yourself on the free throw line, like that's pressure that can kind of mount for you. And when you drop 10% in free throw rate, year over year from 89% to 81%, and the free throws go down like 33% from 6.6 to 4.4. So you're getting to the line less and you're not making them. Like that's a lonely place to be sometimes. And I don't know if there's one stat that kind of like stares out glaringly around like sort of what's going on here. Maybe that's it. It's like these solo moments where the pressure is on. And I don't think anyone's saying that he's like not a pressure player. Like he's hit some big game shots at the end. Like he wants to take shots at the end of the game. I think he's got, like, I'm not worried about that part of him really, or I guess I'm not making that claim, but maybe this he's just like the fact that he's been the face of the franchise. Like if you're the face of a franchise and you're struggling and the team stinks, like that's a tough place to be. Like that's a really, really tough place to be. And it's an unenviable position among athletes when you find yourself in that spot.
And that's why I think it is. I think it's the culmination of everything, right? It's the elevated spot that you're in now coming to Brooklyn. It's the expectations. It's what this team wants to accomplish in the offseason, bringing in stars. It is that whether it matters or not in the grand scheme of things, wanting to make the playoffs and your team is struggling to even come close to being 500 this year, right? Like I think all those things can play a factor. And then you throw in that we know he goes and plays for Team USA every single offseason. And he's one of the top candidates to go and play for USA again in France. Like there's a world where he's going to go right into another offseason and keep to go playing basketball. And you're going to have to look at that at some point and just wonder if you can, from a Nets perspective, steal the value and maybe give him, I know these things don't matter, but it's like give him the relief of going and playing behind a couple of superstars and having your job be infinitely easier and getting back to the player that you're supposed to be. High level defensive player, really can do some nice things offensively and fits into a role well. And we cannot get out of this episode, Doug, without bringing up the fact that whether or not his value still remains high, that deadline, this past deadline, once again, and this is why fans cry out for Josiah to sell the team and for Sean Marks to be fired as well before you get a new head coach in here. There's just no world, whether or not teams still look at Mikal as being a valuable player and a valuable piece. This isn't helping his value. It's not helping to see him start to dip. And if you think fatigue and wear down over the long run of games that he's played in his career could be a factor here too, there's a world where his shelf life of value is actually a little more capped than some other players into their well into their 30s. If you think about the number of games he's played and the fact that maybe that burnout will come a little bit sooner for him than others.
How could it not? I mean, the minutes are through the roof. He has tons of miles. He's not young by NBA standards. He's not old, but he's not young. Right. And he's around the time that you pretty much start figuring out basically what guys are, right? You are 27, 28 is you don't get better. You usually don't get better going into your 30s. Now the decline might not start like a steep rate, but most guys, you don't get to like 31 and be like, hey, turns out they were a superstar. Like that's just not a conversation you really have. It's like you find out kind of now, and then you kind of go through the rest of your career. We're finding out who he is now. The value is unlikely to climb at this point. Again, I don't think it's dropped off a cliff. I think that there's teams that would look at him and still really want to add it, though the story gets tougher and tougher to tell with the more he struggles from the field, because it's like, well, what are you really adding? Are you going back and adding, a super role player? I mean, maybe that player is not like a 4 first-round pick kind of guy, right? At 28 years old. I don't know. Like, I'd be surprised if these offers, if they were even to be made, would be huge offers. I think there's some teams you could look at and be like, where would he even fit in on a championship team right now? Like the Nuggets, would he start? I mean, yeah, but you start over KCP, right? Like you talk about it for a second, probably. Like he would clearly start. Celtics, I don't know. Right? I don't know who would he start over? He probably would, but I guess my point, I'm bringing those two teams up because these are championship level teams that it's not crystal clear. And he would start, but it's not like this complete snap call. And then you get a step lower and he clearly would. But I'm using this to illustrate like sort of like, is he putting you over the top to be a championship level team, right? For another team. I'm not sure about that. And he clearly would help a lot of teams, but I just get worried with every passing day and every extra minute that's played and every shot that's, sort of looks like a struggle and all this other stuff that like, what is it? Is anyone being helped here? Like, I'm not positive about that. Like, I'm not sure anyone's being the team, anybody is being served by this. And I don't know. It's head scratching and it's a little troubling if you're a fan, and it's just a bummer because he's like a great guy by all accounts. And you want the guys like this to win and you want the Nets to win. And he's kind of at the crux of it. So yeah, it's been a not amazing couple weeks here.
I'll tell a couple of quick things before we get out the door here. One, it feels like it relates very much when I think about Saquon Barkley with the New York Giants, and he gets drafted by the team, taken very high overall, too high, as we all would know. But when he finally leaves and gets paid a ton of money to go play with the Philadelphia Eagles, there's a lot of fans, you're going to a rival, like we hate you, how dare you? Me, I thought, good for you. Because you deserve to be somewhere where your job becomes easier. You're going to be celebrated for the talent that you are, and it's not going to come with this other level of pressure necessarily that gets heaped on you when you're on a bad team and everyone wants you, one of the best players, to drag them out of that mire.
Well, also, buddy, because you're also normal. So you're normal and you're a nice guy and your head is on straight and you don't get crazy about this stuff or on like a personal level. So congratulations. I mean, I know this about you, but if you are the kind of person that screams at these guys for doing stuff like this, it's look in the mirror time. I know Adam's not this kind of guy.
This has been a heck of an end of an episode for me. And the last thing that I'll note here as well, just so everybody remembers, everyone says, oh, what a terrible draft class. The Nets are currently 8th in the tankathon. It's going to Houston. They are chasing down desperately the Memphis Grizzlies, who are in the 7th position, maybe even the 6th there with Toronto. And if you think it's a bad draft, that may very well be the case. But I don't care whether or not it's Shepard out of Kentucky, whether it's Castle out of UConn. You have other players like Walter out of Baylor that are all up there, Dillingham out of Kentucky, all these guys. Maybe they are not superstar level talents, but you know how you'll never find out? If you don't have the possibility of drafting one of them, which the Nets don't have. And that gets taken away from you when you don't make proactive decisions. So That was
well,
I'm a very nice
what's the
guy.
only thing worse than a good pick and a bad draft?
There's no pick.
No pick in a bad draft.
Right. So
that's
all of these wonderful things are coming together here beautifully for the Brooklyn Nets. And we're, as you know, we are the conduit for you, the fan base, to vent yourself out. We try to be tempered about it, but it's hard, man. And games like these make it a lot harder, especially around Mikal Bridges.
All right. We'll be back tomorrow where we'll probably end up talking a little bit more about Mikal Bridges. We'll talk a little more about Cam Thomas. He did have a good game. We ended up not spending too much time in the rest of this game. Probably disservice to some of the other guys that did well. But we'll go back.
That battle's coming back around.
Oh, I thought for sure we were going to get a little fisticuffs in this one. But we'll go back. We'll go back through a couple sequences and we'll take a look about what the next couple weeks are looking like for the Nets, the realistic options that they have here over the rest of the season as well. In the meantime, make sure you go to wegotnets.com, grab a copy of the free ebook. Also, make sure you go to YouTube. If you're on YouTube, just hit that like and subscribe button. Just get us to 7,000. Get us to 7,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That'll feel good. Then it's a win. Then everyone wins. That's the big floor raising thing. So go to wegotnets.com and subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
Nu Baday, Doom Boom Bada, Do Boom Boom Ba Da Bay. Now that is David Bowie from Under Pressure.
You got me with that one. All right. One of the all-time great poets, RIP. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.